Yeah. To start with, I would like to thank Dr. Radhakrishna, of course, for giving me this opportunity and for inviting me to present on this forum. I am Shruti Reddy, and I'm a GI and HPP surgeon. I've done my training in India, and I'm currently doing my further training in liver transplant in London. And I'll be discussing the topic of surgery for colorectal liver metastasis. Okay, I'll start with the case. This was a recently operated one. This is a 60-year-old female who had a sigmoid and upper rectal tumor. She underwent anterior resection for this more than 3 years ago, and it was a T3N2 tumor, and she required adjuvant chemotherapy, of course, for this, but then she developed oxaliplatin toxicity for which, because of which only FIREVIEW was given. A year later, she developed this single metastasis in segment 5 of the liver, which was detected on surveillance imaging. And we did a laparoscopic wedge resection, a non-anatomical resection of the liver for this. And another 6 months later, she developed this pulmonary nodule in the left lung. For this, again, we did it was localized with something known as navigational bronchoscopy, and a PATS resection of this nodule was done, wedge resection of the lung was done. At the same time, she had also developed another nodule in segment 8 of the liver, another metastasis, a recurrence in the liver. For this, we did a RFA ablation because it was a small one. And a few months down the line, maybe some 4 months after all this, there was one lymph node which was suspicious on the previous imagings anyways, that grew in size. And there was a mediastinal lymph node. This was a metastatic lymph node again. For this, again, we did gamma knife surgery for this, gamma knife ablation of that. And 6 months later, she developed this recurrence in the segment 4B of the liver, for which this time we gave FOLFIRI as the second line chemotherapy. And after a couple of cycles, there was good response, but then eventually it started progressing despite continuing chemotherapy. And this is where we felt that it may not be a good option to resect, and we wanted to finish the chemotherapy regimen. So 6 cycles of FOLFIRI was completed, and after that there was still partial response was visible. And this is where we offered the choice to the patient as to whether she wanted to undergo a surgery or further chemotherapy or some form of palliation. This is quite frequent in UK, that we have a healthy discussion with the patient and we ask them what is their wishes. We tell them what are the survival benefit, and in this case, probably the lack of long-term survival benefit in view of aggressive disease. But then she chose to have it resected, and we resected it approximately 3 months ago, and we are watching this as to how it will behave. So this seems like a very, the case that I've discussed may not be the standard typical case, but then again, these kind of cases are becoming more and more frequent of late, because colorectal liver metastasis, again, it's not like a one-time procedure. It's more like it keeps coming. You need to keep doing something about it, and in the end, you have that overall survival benefit of whatever few months or years or sometimes cure that you can offer for them. So, and I came across this another abstract recently, and this is there will be probably many more abstracts and many more anecdotal reports like this, but I'm highlighting this because if for those of the surgeons on the group, if someone is raising eyebrows for the kind of surgery which was done here, 3 times liver resection or ablation, and taking care of pulmonary mets and non-regional lymph node mets, but then this is another report where you can see that people are even doing 3rd time hepatectomy. Again, 3rd time hepatectomy is not unusual now, but then they are doing it with vascular resection reconstruction of the extent of doing hepatic vein and vena cava vascular resection and reconstruction. So all of these is becoming accepted of late. It's no longer experimental or a very radical or a very aggressive, it's not something which is considered should not be done anymore. It should be, given the right patient, the right kind of tumor, and the right kind of setup, you should give them a chance by doing all these form of aggressive therapies. And is this supported by evidence? Yes, there are, articles of late. This is one of the recent article from Japan. This is specifically about repeat hepatectomy after resection of colorectal ligaments. In their series over 10 years, they had some 240 patients. Of them, 83% of them developed disease recurrence. So it's like almost all of them are developing disease recurrence, and 50% of them underwent a repeat hepatectomy. And this resulted in survival benefit again. And it did not matter as to how much of the liver was removed in the first place or how aggressive it was. None of those things mattered. And we could see that from the study, the overall survival which they have seen. If there's no recurrence after resection of that colorectal ligament, it means that probably it's good tumor biology and it's good survival. But then if there is recurrence, and if we are not doing a hepatectomy, a redo hepatectomy, at 5 years, the survival will be somewhere around 20%. Whereas if we are doing a redo hepatectomy, given the tumor is resectable in the first place, then the 5-year survival is around 50%. So with this background, let me start my presentation and discuss, the outline as to how I'll be discussing it is, I'll just briefly touch upon colorectal cancer and precision oncology, the molecular advances which are available now. And I'll briefly discuss on oligometastatic disease, and specifically with respect to colorectal liver metastasis. I'll discuss on benefit of resection, how to work up these cases, and how to select the right kind of case for curative procedure, technical advances in surgery or ablation, and the surgical approach or other therapies which can be offered. So I won't go into the details of genetics of colorectal cancer. We know that there are different pathways. It can be the adenoma carcinoma pathway, the MSI pathway, or serrated adenoma pathway, etc. The whole thing of, my point of putting this here is to say that each of these are associated with their own mutations, and the mutations are again having different prognosis. Mutations like MSI or BRAF are associated with poorer prognosis. And as a colorectal surgeon or as a liver surgeon who handles colorectal liver metastasis, it's important for us to keep this in the back of the mind, because many a times the chemotherapeutic regimens which will be planned is many a times based on these. Briefly on the staging of this, so we all know about the AJCC 8 edition, but then the M1 disease is classified as M1A, B, and C. M1A is single organ, M1B is two or more organs, and M1C is peritoneal disease. Again, so this is the Japanese classification. We know that Japanese always have a different classification of their own for most of the tumors, and this is, I have taken this one because it shows the difference in survival very well. So M1A, single organ, and most of the times liver, in this case, we see that it has good survival. And M1C1 is again peritoneal metastasis, but limited to the peritoneum. There's no other organ involvement. It is having, again, good survival compared to, other organ and peritoneal involvement or multiple organ involvement. So with this, we need to give them a chance of cure. We need to be aggressive on treating these kind of metastatic tumors. Coming to the systemic therapy, so this, the metastasis itself, you would consider it as a systemic disease, and chemo is what is the, what was the first line and the only treatment which was available in the past, and now it is a part of the gamut of the multidisciplinary treatments which is offered for this, and possibly the most important of it, because frankly speaking, whatever advances which has been done in surgery or critical care or anything which has improved the treatment and outcomes of colorectal liver metastasis would not have been so without the development in chemotherapy and the newer drugs and improved tolerability of the regimens which are currently being given. And any medical oncologist, when he gives chemotherapy or she gives chemotherapy, would consider both the patient factors and tumor factors. Patient factors can be the age, type, ECOG status, comorbidities, etc. And tumor factors with relevance to chemotherapy would be the tumor load, site, etc. And along with that, mutations and possibly using those mutations as targets for targeted therapy. I put this picture here of, so Oncotype DX, we know that it's well established for breast cancer, but then such a panel was also devised for colon cancer, but then it somehow never took off. It's not commonly used, possibly because it did not make a big change in the management. And the most commonly, when we are actually testing for biomarkers, it's the MSI, when we are processing our pathology specimens, we check for MSI routinely. I mean, we should check for MSI routinely. And other than that, if we are checking for something more, for routine practice, it would be KRAS if we are planning cetuximab or panitumumab or such EGFR directed therapies. Most of the other mutations or biomarkers are not looked for in the current practice. We should also know a bit about enzyme polymorphisms because it's known that these enzyme polymorphisms will result in drug toxicities, or it may result in the drug not being effective in a particular case. But then again, we are not testing all these routinely. It's just it's just about keeping it in the back of the mind. If someone is not if someone is progressing on a particular line of chemotherapy, it's possibly because of one of these things. And we should also know about the innate differences in the right versus left colonic cancers. So right colonic cancers are considered to be more aggressive compared to the left colonic cancers. The advanced right are, comparing advanced right and advanced left cancers, the advanced rights usually have a poorer prognosis than the lefts. And also rectum, we know, is having poorer prognosis compared to the colon cancer in general. I've mentioned about using chemo based on the molecular biomarkers, and there are many emerging biomarkers. There is circulating tumor cells, but then all of this is still in the experimental phase. I need to briefly talk about oligometastatic disease in general before going into the colorectal liver mets itself. So this is a concept which has come up of late, the past few years, of classifying the metastatic load, especially, and this especially works in good biology tumors like maybe prostate cancer or particular types of lung cancer, colorectal cancer, and breast cancer. So these are the kind of tumors, the sites where chemotherapy has also very well evolved. And because of this, there's a potential for giving a multidisciplinary and giving chemo and giving offering surgery, offering ablation, and eventually offering a potential for cure. But when it comes to GI cancers and GI tumors, again, it's the colorectal cancer where it is established. Other than that, there is some evolving evidence in stomach, pancreas, etc. But it's still very early on. It's not as a part of any consensus or guidelines or anything. And the very fact that why did any of this come up? It's like, for example, it's not uncommon that when we open a case of a CA pancreas, maybe in a 40-year-old, we find one solitary liver met and maybe 1 centimeter liver met, which comes out positive on frozen. And that's when technically, strictly speaking, this is stage 4 disease. If you go by the numbers, if you go by the statistics, there's no point of operating them because it's systemic, and it will cause more complications, or there's no survival benefit. But then now, even Whipple's and most of the primary surgeries for the primaries itself are becoming more and more safe. Less and less complications are developing after these surgeries. And to let go a 40-year-old patient, without you can never say. I mean, this is all very controversial field, but then there are many centers which are operating on such cases, and there are case series which are available in the literature, uh, which say that these kind of patients can be operated, but then there's no consensus on it. So I mean, I wouldn't like to push it or anything. It needs to be discussed in MDMs, and yeah, that's where the role of MDMs come. Multidisciplinary meetings in any oncology unit. uh, it should include the surgeon, medical oncologist, radiation oncologist, radiologist, cancer nurse, dietitian, and all of them. And the collective experience, the collective knowledge can help in deciding what's right for that one patient. Because when we sit in the MDM, it's not like, despite all the evidence and everything in the back of the mind, when we sit in the MDM, we are deciding what's best for that one patient. We're not deciding as to what the statistics or what the figures say. So that's where the role of MDMs in such complex scenarios, is very important. At the same time, also, the location of metastasis and these kind of cases should be referred at in time, and the patient should always be involved for timely decision making. Uh, and yeah, in colorectal cancer, what qualifies as oligometastatic disease, maybe 2 or 3 sites, 5 or sometimes less than that lesions. But then we know that in colorectal mets, it's not the case. Even bilobar, more than 5 lesions, or all of those is acceptable. But then non-visceral organs, even nodes is acceptable now. Non-regional lymph nodes is acceptable. Ovary and peritoneum, it's all been acceptable since the past many years. Bone and brain is something which is a definite no-no. You can't offer any curative treatment if there's bone and brain mets. Coming to colorectal liver mets itself, the incidence, it's approximately 25%. 25% of the people who have colon or rectal cancer, either synchronously or metachronously, will develop liver metastasis. Again, the biology is something which is very important. Why are we offering curative therapies? Because the theory is that, because the colon and rectum drain through the portal vein and into the liver. So this is, the first site of metastasis. So this can be considered as a regional metastasis rather than a systemic disease, and because of that, there's a potential for cure. And I would also like to mention about the lead time bias. In the West, most of these cases, whether it's colorectal cancers or liver mets subsequent to that, are all detected by screening. That's not the case here in India and in the most of our countries in the East. So most of the cases that we see come at a later stage with advanced disease and with multi-site metastasis, where curative treatment may not be possible. And what is the survival benefit of these cases, on providing care for these cases? Obviously, if you don't do anything, just provide supportive care, they have a median life expectancy of around 6 months, with palliative chemo around 18 months, and with curative therapy, the median survival benefit is around 40 months. And this figure is, again, probably it's better than that. It's on a case-to-case basis. And we also need to keep it in mind that even though liver is the common site and we see a lot of those things, despite liver-only disease being there, only 20% of them are resectable. So if they are not resectable upfront, we need to think of conversion chemotherapy, etc. I'll come to that in my future slides. So why do we need to offer any form of curative therapy? So this is a slightly older study from 2010, but then it puts the point very well. So we can see that this is the survival. This is the survival curve for liver resection for colorectal liver metastasis. This is better than the survival for stage 3 disease, that is node positive disease. So we can always argue that when we are doing colectomy for node positive diseases, and when we can see that if we are doing liver resection, curative liver resection for colorectal liver metastasis, the organ the overall survival will be better than that. So it's worth doing that. And what has improved the results of the outcomes of colorectal liver metastasis surgery? Obviously, when it comes to liver surgery in general, anesthesia and critical care has improved. There are so many advances, low CVP, using low CVP, and we have so much more knowledge of how to go about doing a proper liver resection now than we probably did 20-25 years ago. And there's also better understanding of liver anatomy now with liver transplant, living donor liver transplant, and surgery for other kind of liver tumors as well, which has taken off so well. We have better understanding of liver anatomy, and that's very useful in managing colorectal liver mets, where we are doing some very complex resections. There's also laparoscopy, which has come up in a big way. We have better dissection or resection devices like CUSA, etc., which have come up now, which gives almost bloodless kind of resection, or at least lesser blood loss can be achieved with them. And the ischemia techniques are also being used selectively of late. We're not doing Pringles in all of them. We know how much of Pringles to do and when to go for selective occlusion, Gleasonian approach, etc. We just know how to do a better liver surgery now. And we also have many adjuncts of ablation, RFA, microwave, etc., name it. We have all of them now. And there's also improvements in disease control by surgery itself, in that we are doing more radical surgery now. We are doing more complex resections. Vascular resections are being done more commonly. Ex vivo techniques, like, for example, in situ cold perfusion or antesetum or excitum resections. Ex situ resections are being done in the complex cases where we know that simple clamping or use of ischemia techniques is not enough for resecting those tumors. So how do we approach these patients? So obviously we look at the patient first. I mean, whatever we call it, eyeball test, or sometimes we just look at them. We know that someone is fit or not fit, and sometimes it requires a further assessment, like look at the performance status. Might have to do a CPEX. Comorbidities, whether they are controlled or not, how frail are they, how is the nutrition, etc. So all of these, so that's the first step in assessing the patient, and that's the first part of the approach. Following that, you look at the tumor characteristics. First look at the primary tumor. How was it? Was it adequate resection? Was the lymph node resection adequate, or was it positive or not? Is there any recurrence there which needs to be tackled? How do we approach that? As well as look at the liver metastasis, the number of lesions, size, and the presence of extrahepatic disease, or again CEA. Look at the CEA and the disease-free interval. So these are the many tumor-related factors that we look at. And after that, it comes to the surgeon and the surgery, the technical part, where the size and the distribution of liver metastasis to be resected needs to be assessed, and all that. The main thing that we need to keep in mind is we need to leave a good volume of future liver remnant, which is functional and which can take care of all the functions of the liver without resulting in posthepatic liver failure, or at least giving a chance for recovery after that. So coming to workup and case selection. So investigations obviously starts with cross-sectional imaging. Contrast CT is the most commonly performed study. Again, it's not just okay to order a contrast CT, just write on a piece of paper, get a CT done. We need to give the specific instructions. Protocol planning is very important. It needs to be from a good quality CT scanner. It should have adequate resolution. It should always include the lungs, because that's the next most common site of metastasis after the liver. It should be dual phase, because if we are planning a liver resection, we need to know all the vascular structures. So it should be at least a dual phase CT scan. And again, the slice thickness, the liver, the part of when we are planning liver resection, we should have thin slices for at least the liver sections, so that we'll be able to plan it better. CA is of course a part of any workup for colorectal cancer. Ancillary investigations in the form of evaluation of comorbidities or optimization or further consultations with other specialties, etc., is a part of, just like a part of any major surgery. I would like to discuss on MRI here. So MRI it's not commonly done. You can do it. It can replace CT, but then it has specific advantages in a few areas. That's when the metastases are less than 1 centimeter. So CT usually, it may or may not, but then MRI has a better sensitivity for picking up less than 1 centimeter lesions. And secondly, if there's fatty liver. So fatty liver, again, when we are giving chemotherapy, I'll come to that later. When we are giving chemotherapy in the preoperative setting, many of the livers will become fatty, or there might be pre-existing fatty liver itself with this, obesity, pandemic, NAFLDs. So in those cases, it might be difficult to pick up these small lesions. So in those cases, MRI comes out very handy. NCCN says MRI should be done if liver surgery is being performed, but then it's not the usual norm. PET-CT, okay. Coming to PET-CT, it's a very, I won't say very controversial, but it's still a controversial field. So it's commonly used for restaging. Classical teaching is that it's used for equivocal imaging or high suspicion of other meds or rising CEA postoperatively, etc. But then in reality, it's used much more often. If we are doing a major liver resection, a high volume liver disease, the tumor burden in the liver itself is so much that we are thinking that there might be extrahepatic metastasis as well, which has not been picked up on cross-sectional imaging, or high-risk surgery for a particular patient. Many of these patients who come are in their 60s, 70s, 80s, so doing any kind of liver surgery in them would be high risk. So in those kind of cases, obviously you want to make sure that you're not dealing with a extensively metastatic disease, and also to look for metabolic response post-chemotherapy. So again, I'm not advocating that PET-CT should be done in all cases. Many institutions will have their own protocols. I can at least say that in NHS, it's used more commonly because of multiple other reasons, because of referrals, etc. It works that way for NHS. And, even in India, so it can be used. It can be used based on a case-to-case basis, at least, if not as a blanket. The yield of PET-CT, again, it ranges between 15 to 30%. Metabolic response assessment after PET-CT. Again, there are parameters like SUV max, metabolic tumor volume, etc., which are used to assess the metabolic response. And also, so in specific cases where it's very useful, so after ablation with RFA or maybe microwave ablation, when there is tumor necrosis and there will be cystic degeneration, or that entire area will appear hypodense. So there might be residual tumor cells which might grow and result in a recurrence. In those kind of recurrences, if you have to wait for CT to detect that, it might be a few more months than when a PET-CT can detect. A PET-CT can detect in those cases much more earlier. So these are a few of the instances where PET-CT has benefits. But all that said and done, we need to remember that the sensitivity of FDG PET itself is lowered by neoadjuvant chemotherapy, and we know that neoadjuvant or preoperative chemotherapy is almost the norm for liver tumors. So it should be used on a case-to-case basis, assess whether your patient actually needs it and then use it, rather than using always or not using it at all. So to support that, or to give an example of how it helped in one of our cases. So this was again a recent case which was operated. This man was in his 60s and he had a sigmoid tumor again with liver metastasis in this is segment 5 and in segment 2 as well. And this man he was a bit run down, and the tumor was also partially obstructing. So for this, colonic stent was placed, and chemotherapy was given subsequently. Uh, Folfree was given in him, and after 2 cycles of Folfree, there was partial response. I'm not sure, 2 or 3 cycles of Folfree. There was partial response in the sigmoid lesion, and the liver lesions disappeared. So this patient was offered, he underwent anterior resection, and he was kept on follow-up. A year later, he recurred. The original lesion, which was found on segment 2, recurred. Along with that, there were a few more nodules dispersed in the segment on the right lobe of the liver, segments 5, 6, and there was one on the segment 8 as well. So this patient eventually completed his chemotherapy. That's when all the right lobe lesions disappeared, but then the left lobe larger lesion remained, and he underwent a left lateral segmentectomy, and he's still under surveillance for, re-emergence of any of these lesions, for which he will have to undergo a repeat surgery. So when we are doing surgeries like this, for multi-site metastasis, etc., it's much more easier if we can detect these lesions early, so that we can plan the chemotherapy or surgery in time, and that's how PET-CT helps. Coming to clinical risk score, this is another very commonly discussed thing in colorectal liver mets. So the Fong score was one of the oldest, and there are other scores as well. Basingstoke score is from UK again, and others from Pittsburgh, Nordlinger, etc. But then the basic concept behind these clinical risk scores is that they are giving scores to each of the prognostic factors that we know are bad, and then assessing as to what is the survival or benefit of operating on those patients. So I won't go into the details of each score, because now it's not like we are using a particular scoring system. We look again at each of the factors and see what is the benefit of operating, not operating, etc. So these factors are, again, node positive disease has poorer prognosis. Shorter disease-free period, again, implies bad tumor biology. Multiple tumors, again, or larger tumor, again, it's the higher tumor load, and it's a poor prognostic factor. Preoperative CEA, if it is very high, and especially if it does not come down after the preoperative chemotherapy, it's again a bad prognostic sign. And others like bilobar and the resection status of the primary, etc., are all considered as prognostic factors. There's another controversy here as to whether synchronous disease has poorer prognosis than the metachronous disease, metachronous liver mets. So initially it was thought that synchronous disease means it's bad tumor biology, but again, now it's debated. The more recent studies are saying that the survival benefit after resecting these tumors, whether it's synchronous or metachronous, there's no change in survival. So it's worthwhile operating on synchronous as well. But again, this is again a controversial field. There's divided opinion. But all that I can say is synchronous tumors are no longer a contraindication for operating. So all that in the background, just to briefly summarize what are the selection criteria. Traditionally, we were considering less than 3 metastasis, less than 5 centimeters, or early T stage was a requisite, but then currently none of those are so. All of them are curable, but then if any of those factors are there, we need to accept and know and discuss with the patient that the prognosis is poorer. And traditionally, unilobar disease was considered to be resectable, but now bilobar disease is not a contraindication. I discussed on metachronous synchronous already. And previously we were wanting a more than 1 centimeter resection margin. If that was not achievable, resection was not even offered, but now that's not the case. We just need to get a microscopically negative margin. And previously it was required that there should be no extrahepatic disease, but now we know that the favorable sites like pulmonary or ovary, non-regional nodes, all of these can be offered curative intent treatment as well. Portal nodes negative again was a requisite in the past. Now we don't think it's anymore valid to think like that. And again, patients, it was required to operate on younger patients, less than 65 years in the past. And now we know that it's not the chronological age, it's the biological age which actually makes a difference in these things. Coming to the technical advances. So again, colorectal liver mets, it can be a small metastasis like that, which can get away with a simple metastatectomy wedge resection. Or it can be a large, tumor, which is occupying almost the entire lobe, sitting on the vascular pedicle. And in these cases, obviously the patient will require a major hepatectomy, some kind of volume optimization before hepatectomy. And these patients will also require chemotherapy routinely before surgery. So for volume optimization, again, you can do portal vein embolization, or what was done in our case was ALPS. I'll just show this video. So this was a tumor in the right lobe of the liver, which is sitting on the right portal vein, going on into the segment 4B as well. The segment 4A was spared, and segment 2-3 was spared as well. So ALPS was planned in this case. The patient had had FOLFOX in the preoperative period. This was the port placement. And this is where the hilar dissection is being done. That's the right hepatic artery being hooked and looped. And that's the right portal vein being hooked and ligated. So again, in ALPS, we don't ligate the right hepatic artery in the first stage. It will be done in the second stage. But we are just placing a vessel loop there around the right hepatic artery for easy identification in the second stage. And the right portal vein is being clipped and divided. Yeah, so it's 2 clips proximally and 1 clip distally and divided. After this, we can see the demarcation line, and based on the demarcation line, we have done so again, in this case, we have done a partial ALPS. So ALPS again you can either do a complete transection or a partial transection. And there are so many other modifications as well where we can use RFA, tourniquet, etc. In this case, we've done a partial ALPS. It's shown to be good enough, almost similar to complete ALPS. I'll just pause this for a minute. Yeah, it's been shown that it's equivalent to complete ALPS in terms of FLR regeneration. And this is where we are placing the plastic. So this was an older case, so that's why plastic was being placed in the plane of transection. It's not, it's not a must anymore. And that was, and that was something called PO-Seal. It's a resin which prevents bile leaks. And I'll pause this for a while here. So this was, again, in that particular case, because the segment 4A was paired, we kind of went more to the right and included the segment 4A as well in the FLR. And this was prior to the ALPS stage 1, where the tumor was somewhere here. We can see that this was the FLR. And after stage 1 ALPS, this is the this is the line of transection, and this is the atrophied right lobe, and we can see that there was a 200 mils of increase in the volume. So, and again, so because you might think that 710 mils in the first place, and I don't know what's the exact percentage in this case. I'm sorry, this is a borrowed video. You might think that that's good enough, but then we need to remember that these are post-chemo livers. we can't just think of resecting and leaving like 25% or 30% FLR. We need to leave a slightly larger FLR because the functional capacity of the remnant itself will be lesser. And yeah, so this is the intraoperative picture where, again, we can see here that, the mottling, the congestion in the liver, again, is because of the blue liver. That's the post-Pol-Fox, the chemotherapy-associated changes. And this is the transection line. We can see that the FLR has hypertrophied well, and this is the atrophied and necrotic right lobe. And there's some collection there. There will always be some pus collection there. And this is where the right hepatic artery was divided now. And completion ALPS was done. So again, when planning these surgeries, we need to remember that, the standard hepatectomy principles. We always need to aim for an R0 resection. FLR evaluation and optimization is required. Again, in planning hepatectomy, we should always think of adequate inflow and outflow for the FLR. And this is easier if we can preserve at least 2 contiguous liver segments in complex resections. And vascular resections is also allowed in colorectal mets. We might have to plan it in advance, improvise. We'll have to select the grafts or whatever kind of patch that we are going to use for, reconstructing the vascular resections. And all of this, again, is aided by the center volume. High volume centers will develop such expertise sooner, and it's always better to get treated in high volume center, and also surgeon competency depends on that. So this is how about the resection margin. So we are going to resect, okay, but then resection margin, initially we were thinking it's 1 centimeter, but then I've not given the reference here, but then this was an article from MD Anderson. I think it was in 2005, old article, but then it showed that, we don't need to have a more than 1 centimeter margin. As we can see here, compared to positive margins, whether the margin is more than 1 centimeters or less than 1 centimeter or 1 millimeter, the disease-free survival, the survival advantage is the same. So we just have to avoid a positive margin, and pathologically, when your pathologist gives a report, they look for 1 mm cancer-free margin to call it a R0 resection. So if you can get that, that's good enough. So you should aim for one should aim for a 1 centimeter margin, but then sometimes the size, location will not allow that. In those kind of cases, we should not shy away from resecting, saying that we can't get a 1 centimeter margin. It should still be performed, but then we should at least aim for R0 resection. And again, coming to type of hepatectomy, is anatomical better or non-anatomical? So major anatomical resections are definitely more effective in reducing intrahepatic recurrence. It's associated with better overall survival. It results in a complete resection and better survival. And we are reducing the at-risk liver here. That's the line of thought. And it's not just in colorectal mets. The same kind of thought can be applied in HCC as well. But then specific necessity here is in colorectal mets, we need to preserve the functional volume. Sorry. We need to preserve the functional volume. So whenever possible, we might want to do anatomical resection, but again, it all depends on the size, the type of tumor, what kind of resection it's more feasible for. I'll come to that later. So if it's something, if anatomical resection suits that, like for example, the ALPS video which I showed a single large metastasis in the right lobe. So their anatomical resection was more sensible than doing something aggressive. But then if there's multiple liver metastases scattered all over, there's no point of doing an anatomical resection. We'll have to do something else. And also this is an image which is provided by our histopathologist in King's. So this shows a small tumor. This is, I think this was a 2 centimeter tumor in the start, but then after ablation or after chemotherapy, there's almost complete necrosis and this small residual subcapsular tumor. And in such kind of cases, there's no sense in doing an anatomical resection. A wedge resection, as what was done in this case, was a more appropriate surgery. So, and also there's change in thought, that change in line of thought, that resecting more at-risk parenchyma, where metastasis could seed, does not really reduce the disease recurrence. You know, that line of thought is gone, that you do extended right hepatectomy for segment 5/8 tumor, or you do a right hepatectomy for a segment 5/8 tumor. You're taking away the possibility of tumor seeding within the right portal vein, and whatever metastasis can happen in the right posterior sector. It's not like that anymore. We are trying to conserve as much as liver as possible. So why is this? The change in doctrine is again because of this era of chemotherapy-associated liver injury. I'll come to that in the future slides. So chemotherapy-associated liver injury is a big problem. We are giving so much of chemotherapy in the preoperative period that most of these livers are not very functional. The quality of the liver is not very good. So we can't afford excessive parenchymal loss. Also, the problem of post-hepatectomy liver failure will arise in such cases. Also, tumor recurrence will occur even after major anatomical resection. It's not like if we do a major anatomical resection, there won't be any recurrence in the whatever has been left out, in the FLR which has been left out. But then what does happen is the remnant liver which has been left back is small. Obviously, it will regenerate over time, but then the vascular pattern, vascular inflow and outflow cannot be managed for a redo resection. In those kind of cases, again, if you look at the long-term survival for that one particular case, you'll be losing out by doing anatomical resection. So again, be very selective. I'll come to that as to how we can think about it. And we also have many ablative therapies available, whether it's RFA, microwave, IRE, etc. So all of these form adjuncts in helping out management of multi-site metastasis. Sorry, bilobar metastasis or multifocal metastasis. So all of this has resulted in the development of a surgical philosophy known as parenchymal sparing liver surgery. I'll be speaking a lot on this. So basically, for parenchymal sparing liver surgery, what is prerequisite is we need to have a thorough knowledge of liver anatomy. Intraoperative ultrasound skills is definitely needed. A good intraoperative ultrasound is needed. And again, instead of doing it with the standard percutaneous abdominal probes, the convex probes, one of these key probes will be so much more helpful in, enabling complete evaluation of the liver. And obviously the laparoscopic ultrasound probe for laparoscopic resections. ICG camera is preferable. Ablation instruments, again, so this is the RFA probe, the newer one with the multi-prong RFA probe, which has a larger area of ablation. This is the microwave probes, and this is the new kid on the block. This is IRE. So I'll speak a bit on IRE. So IRE, the commercial name, I think it's NanoKnife. So this uses a different kind of technology. It's not based on thermal ablation. It uses electricity impulses. So it's not that the tumor is getting heated or the adjacent tissues are getting heated. And the one definite advantage that this has over any other forms of ablation is that this can be used right next to any of the major vessels, which is something that we won't use a thermal device next to. And because we can use it next to major vessels, it's commonly used for margin accentuation, very commonly used for borderline resectable pancreatic tumors, where we want to get a negative margin. We kind of tend to clear the margin with IRE. It's also used in palliative settings, and in liver, it can also be used for margin accentuation or for ablation of any particular tumor. So parenchymal sparing surgery, again, it can be done in an anatomical fashion or a non-anatomical fashion. So coming to anatomical resections, for example, in this particular tumor, if you were to do a non-parenchymal sparing approach, a standard anatomical liver surgery, so we would have to do a right hepatectomy. But then, because we are doing a parenchymal sparing surgery now, we will be doing a more like a right superior quadrant of the liver resection. That's segment 7 and 8. And the right hepatic vein will get excised along with this because of the tumor proximity to that. So in that case, the inferior segments will drain through one of the connecting veins into the middle hepatic vein. We'll have to look out for all these before planning, of course. Again, inferior lesions, it's much easier. Superior lesions will be difficult. Inferior lesions, it's much easier to do anatomical segment 5 and 6 resection in this case. Lateral lesions, you can do a right posterior sectionectomy. Central lesions, instead of doing extended right or extended left based on the which vascular pedicle the tumor is close to, one can always do a central hepatectomy and preserve a lot more future liver remnant. And superior tumors, again, you can even excise up to 2 hepatic veins and rely on just 1 hepatic vein for drainage of the inferior segments. The same parenchymal sparing surgery can also be done in a non-anatomical fashion. For example, in this tumor, it's very common that we do a left lateral segmentectomy for this, the easiest liver surgery which can be done. But then it's better that we do a wedge resection for this and leave the left lateral segment behind. Again, for central tumors, instead of doing mesohepatectomy, this is something like a mini mesohepatectomy. This can be done. Lateral tumors, again, instead of doing the right, so if this lesion were to be not there, right posterior sectionectomy would have been enough. So, but then because this extra lesion is there, a right posterior sectionectomy with extending the margin into segment 5-8 to get a margin clearance. And these are other kind of resections where you can do a lateral and inferior resection or multiple metastasectomies, and in case of deep-seated metastasis, ablation. These kind of therapies is what is preferable of late. These are some of the images which I've taken from the book Ultrasound Guided Liver Surgery by Prof. Dorzilli. Wonderful book, wonderful surgeon. Again, so this is again example of how he is doing parenchymal sparing liver surgery using ultrasound guidance. This was a very centrally located tumor, closely related to the IVC and the hepatic veins. He's resected the middle hepatic vein. He's relied on the connecting veins for drainage of this part of the liver. And this is another very atypical liver resection where multiple liver resections, multiple non-anatomical liver resections, and he's also used a patch on MHV here. And this is another case where a left extended hepatectomy has been done, but then we can see that there's still some tumor in this, whatever remnant has been left back. So there's some more wedge resections which has been done to get eventual R0 resection. And some of the techniques described are also very handy. So firstly, we need to learn ultrasound, diagnostic ultrasound of the liver well. And once we are well versed with that, I've tried this and it comes out very well. So this is called as the probe compression, where this is the tumor, whichever pedicle is supplying the tumor can be compressed. Obviously, it depends on the tumor site also. So the pedicle can be compressed between the finger and the ultrasound probe. And by doing this, we'll get a line of demarcation, and that line of demarcation can be marked out by the assistant, and the surgery can be completed. And this will be an anatomical liver resection because we are going by the pedicle. So it's either a segmentectomy, subsegmentectomy. These can be done in this fashion. And many other techniques has been described. All of these come in handy. Again, we need to know when to use them, when not to use them, which patient to use them in, and etc. It comes with case selection is very important in these kind of cases. Now coming to laparoscopic liver surgery for colorectal liver metastasis. So there are studies, there are randomized controlled trials which have shown that laparoscopic surgery has definite advantages, lesser complications, and the costs were also equal, and also the overall survival was equal. There's no difference in other short-term survival parameters. There's no difference in other short-term outcomes either. And quality of life is definitely better in laparoscopic liver surgery. And again, it's not like laparoscopic liver surgery is limited to simpler liver resections, wedge resections, etc. Even posterior superior segments, which is technically difficult laparoscopically, can be done. It was also done in this randomized control trial. And how about doing major hepatectomies? Again, this is not a study with only colorectal mets. It's in general about laparoscopy versus open major hepatectomy, and it's shown that laparoscopy does have definite advantages in terms of short-term complications. The overall survival was also not significantly different, but then obviously long-term outcomes, we need to wait and see how the future data comes out.
Hello, Guru, okay.
Someone has not muted their mic. Okay. Coming to ICG techniques, so laparoscopic liver, with laparoscopic liver resections, ICG is very useful. And again, this has come up in the East, where they see a lot of HCCs and they need to do HCC resections in child-age cirrhotics. So this is one such case for HCC. It's not colorectal mets, but again, the principles are the same. This is ultrasound, laparoscopic ultrasound, which has a needle probe, channel for needle, and this needle is inserted, and there is direct portal vein puncture, portal vein pedicle puncture can be done, ICG can be injected, and this is called as positive staining of the liver, where we can see that particular region which is supplied by that portal vein pedicle is delineated, and we can do the resection. There's also something called negative staining, where ICG is given IV, and again, most of these data it's in HCCs because it's coming from the East. Again, HCCs is more common than colorectal mets, but then this is a possibility it can be used, and maybe there are anecdotal reports of these being used in the West or elsewhere also. Is there evidence in support of parenchymal sparing liver surgery? Yes, definitely yes. There's a lot of evidence. It does not increase the intrahepatic recurrence. It is associated with improved salvageability and survival. It's safer than major hepatectomy, and it does not impair patient's prognosis. And discussing one particular, so this is a systematic review, a recent one. So here it shows that, other than few of the studies, the older studies where there was a significant difference in R0 resection rate or blood loss, most of the short-term parameters, short-term outcome measures like blood loss, transfusion, R0 resection, length of stay, major complication rate or mortality rate is similar in both the groups of either parenchymal sparing or anatomical resections. And again, long-term oncological outcomes are also similar in most of the studies, but we need to wait for more data before commenting on long-term oncological outcomes. But for now, we know that it's parenchymal sparing liver surgery is not worse than anatomical resection. So what's the verdict? We need to critically appraise the available evidence, which we are kind of doing now, and assess the local expertise. Again, something which is available in a very established and cancer center, which has almost all the gadgets and all the all the support which is required for these kind of cases may not be available in many of the Indian cancer centers. We need to see how we can improvise, what we can do with what we have, and give the best outcomes. And again, there's a lot of common sense. As I said, it's not like parenchymal sparing liver surgery is to be applied for everyone, because we know that sometimes if there's a single large tumor, as I showed in my video, it's better to do an anatomical liver resection. Coming to the approach, again, I will start with chemotherapy protocols, because chemotherapy is what is making the difference. Chemotherapy is what needs to, the treatment for colorectal liver mets should start with chemotherapy, and that makes all the difference many a times. So about the chemotherapy protocols, again, there's no one size which fits all. We need to define what is our goal at the outset, whether it's palliation, whether it's treatment for cure, and we're going to resect or conversion chemotherapy, etc. And look at the tumor and patient factors, which I alluded earlier, and then decide on the protocols. The most commonly used regimens are FOLFOX, FOLFIRI. Targeted therapies like cetuximab, panitumumab may be given depending on the EGFR status, KRAS status, and bevacizumab, which is a VEGF inhibitor, is also very commonly used in colorectal liver mets in second line. And FOLFOXIRI, which is a triplet regimen, can be given depending on how much the patient can tolerate such a toxicity. Yeah, coming to which, so the optimal chemotherapy protocol would be a doublet or triplet protocol with or without targeted therapy. We need to give at least 3 or 4 cycles in the preoperative period and assess at 2 months. And again, I need to stress this very well, that our goal should be conversion. We are not planning to cure with chemotherapy because we don't want disappearing liver mets. We need to assess at 2 months and see if it is resectable. If it's resectable, go ahead and resect it. And we need to change over to second line if there's no response or progression. And all of this, the choice of chemotherapy, the planning, etc., should always be balanced on the risks. Chemotherapy is associated with local and systemic toxicity. Patient may not respond to chemotherapy. There might be progression of the tumor, and there can be vanishing liver mets, which is another problem. So again, coming to the local chemotherapy toxicity, chemotherapy-associated liver injury is a major problem. So this is from one of the older articles from Fong, where it's elucidating very well, it's showing very well that this was the colorectal met prior to giving chemotherapy. We can see that the tumor on histopathology is quite florid. On giving chemotherapy, which was, I think, FOLFIRI in this case, there is definite regression in the tumor. The tumor is smaller in size, but then look at the background liver parenchyma. It's just black. It's just fatty. So this kind of the fatty liver or chemotherapy associated steatohepatitis is commonly seen in irinotecan. And again, the histological counterpart of that, we can see that there's good response of the tumor, but then the surrounding liver parenchyma is just very fatty. So these are some of the images which has been kindly provided by our pathologist, Dr. Rosa. So this is again blue liver, which is seen in FOLFOX sinusoidal obstruction syndrome. This is the gross specimen of the resected specimen, where we can see that the whole of that specimen is congested. There's subcapsular hemorrhages. It's just very congested and hemorrhagic. And also this is the cut section where we can see that there is sinusoidal congestion, and this is the tumor. And on the histological examination, again, we can see sinusoidal congestion, and central veins are barely seen in this, and the liver plates are also atrophied. And there's sinusoidal fibrosis as well. This is Masson's trichome stain showing that. And this is the chemotherapy-associated steatohepatitis, which I said, this was one of our cases which was treated with FOLFIRI and developed steatohepatitis after that. So again, a video to show how difficult or how it feels intraoperatively to operate on these kind of livers. I'll skip these. So this was after, so we can see that, so this was after clamping of the right pedicle, so we can see the demarcation line, but this is the otherwise perfused liver. We can see that it's very yellow. You can see patches of fat here, fatty deposition, yellow, steatotic liver. And we start cutting it. We can see, look at the transection line, transection plane. It's very fatty. The yellowness is all fatty. This is not the normal liver, and such kind of livers where you're seeing so much of fat deposition can obviously not be expected to have very good post-operative liver function, and we need to keep it in mind that we need to leave a larger FLR in these kind of cases. So finally, based on all these, the surgical planning after chemotherapy will depend on liver quality, the hepatic tumor load and distribution, extrahepatic disease, whether it's present or not, and if it is present, if it is in a favorable site or not. And based on this, the colorectal liver met itself, you can classify it as, there are multiple classifications. I've just tried to include as many different types as possible, as many different scenarios as possible. Sometimes it can be directly resectable, straightforward, not a problem, give some chemo, go ahead and resect. Sometimes it's potentially resectable. There's some other issues with either the primary or the patient, and we need to wait a bit, we need to give a bit of chemo, and we need to see how it goes about. Or sometimes it's unresectable, sometimes it's unresectable, technically unresectable. That's where we need to give conversion therapy and try to convert it to a resectable. And sometimes it may be amenable for combination therapy. So it's obviously it may not be one single tumor, it might be multiple lesions. Few of them can be treated with surgery and few of them with ablation. And sometimes these are unresectable due to multi-system involvement. But again, how do you define unresectability? Now it's getting more and more tricky. As I showed in the first case, which I alluded that, lung is not a contraindication, non-regional lymph node is not a contraindication, ovary is not a contraindication. How about limited peritoneal mets? I'll come to that later. So again, on a case-to-case basis, these needs to be kept in mind, assessed, and the best treatment given. And also recurrences, as I again showed in my first few slides, it's common to operate on reoperate and redo hepatectomies, do hepatectomies in these kind of cases. So all these are possibilities, possible scenarios when you're seeing a case of colorectal liver met. So how about liver and peritoneal mets? So it's not commonly done, but then I could find a couple of studies in the literature, both of them from France. A few centers in France are doing this. Obviously, selection is very important in such cases where they go for a low peritoneal carcinomatosis index, less than 12, a smaller volume of liver disease. Look at the chemotoxicity, because you're giving chemo for the liver, you're also giving HIPEC. You're wanting to load a lot of chemo into the patient system. There will be chemotoxicity is a real issue in these kind of problems, in these kind of cases. And the survival advantage is only in a few months. So it's not practiced world over. It's not a common practice is what I can say. Maybe a few centers use this anecdotally or have their own center-based protocols for doing this. Coming to synchronous colorectal liver mets and the approach for it, so this is the common, for postgraduates who are watching this, this is, the usual discussion goes a lot around this, what do you do first, how do you approach it, etc. But then it's quite simple, it's not very complex. I'll come to this. I'll explain the concept of why we do either primary first or liver first or simultaneous, so that a case-based decision will be easier. So firstly, if there's synchronous colorectal liver metastasis, obviously the primary and the liver metastasis, both of them will have to be assessed. So the primary, if it is symptomatic or not. If the primary is symptomatic, obviously, if there's impending obstruction or if there's perforation, something of that sort, the primary will need immediate attention then. So in that case, it would be straightforward to do a primary first. Sorry. And we should also look for the need for neoadjuvant therapy. If there's rectal primary, we might have to give neoadjuvant radiotherapy as a part of the protocols. And when there is liver metastasis, almost always we need to put some form of preoperative chemotherapy before liver metastases are operated on. And then we also used, the next step that we need to do is assess the resectability of the liver lesions. If it is resectable or not, and if it is resectable, sometimes it's straightforward that we just need to give a couple of sessions of chemotherapy and go ahead with the resection if it's not progressing. But then if it's unresectable, we'll have to give conversion chemotherapy. It might have to be more aggressive for longer period of time, convert it into resectable and then do the surgery. And finally, it's about the feasibility of a simultaneous approach. So simultaneous approach where we are operating on both the colorectal primary and the liver at the same time. It's not a easy undertaking. Obviously, sometimes it will involve two teams. May not be in India if when people are trained both in GI and HPP, and they may be operating on both luminal and HPP cancers. Otherwise, in the West, many a times the colorectal team and the HPP team is different. So it will involve two teams, longer operative time. And again, most of these patients being old will have their own set of comorbidities, longer anesthesia time. And we'll also have to look at the extent of hepatectomy that we are doing in such cases. If it is a minor hepatectomy, it's acceptable, understandable. And the primary resection again. So if it's a rectal tumor, or if it's a locally advanced colonic tumor, if we are having to do a multi-organ resection, or maybe along with the rectal resection, we might have to do some form of pelvic maybe exenteration, or we might have to do a total hysterectomy or BSO. The more complex the primary surgery becomes, again, it's not advisable to do a simultaneous approach. So keeping these four factors in mind is what is important. Again, most of the, if you look at most of the literature, they give multiple scenarios, like you need to look at whether primary is symptomatic or asymptomatic, and then combine it with liver lesion, whether it's resectable or not resectable, then look for feasibility of simultaneous, etc. So when you keep these 3 or 4 factors in mind and do multiple permutations and combinations, you'll get some 20, 30 odd scenarios. And so all that I'm trying to say is that this is the order in which we need to think and approach the patient when we are planning the sequence of therapy for synchronous colorectal mets. And again, direct surgery for liver without chemotherapy should be discouraged. Again, I want to insist on this, but again, there might be instances where someone is doing a colectomy and they find a small liver met which is amenable for wedge resection. In those kind of cases, they can go ahead and do the wedge resection and give postoperative chemotherapy. Otherwise, in preoperatively diagnosed tumors with diagnosed liver mets, along with a high tumor burden in the liver, they almost always require preoperative chemotherapy. So again, solving the confusion on what to do first, primary first, liver first, or simultaneous. So primary first in general needs to be done for symptomatic primary. And again, when we say symptomatic primary, it's if the primary is obstructed or perforated, bleeding tumors are not exactly considered as symptomatic because they're usually slow bleeders and they can be managed with chemotherapy. And again, the availability of colonic stents complicates this statement of operating on obstructed lesions, but then it's still preferable to operate on obstructed lesions first instead of using colonic stents, because colonic stents are still commonly used more in the more flail patients where you want to buy some time, etc. Otherwise, in a fit patient with obstruction, it's preferable that you do the primary surgery first. And again, when I say perforation, tumor perforation, obviously treat it first. But then if someone is having a left-sided colonic lesion, which has obstructed and resulted in closed loop obstruction and cecal perforation, and if a general surgeon is choosing to do a covering loop ileostomy and do a cecal perforation repair or something in that case, where we are not exactly resecting the primary, because you'll have to do a subtotal subtotal colectomy in that case. So in these kind of cases, again, after you do the stoma, after one does the stoma, it's preferable that the liver lesion is treated first, because the obstruction or the perforation has been taken care of. Otherwise, if you're doing a subtotal colectomy, obviously it will be primary first. Again, coming to liver first. So liver first approach is done when there's higher tumor burden in the liver, because we think that we need to approach that first, because that is more likely to metastasize further and cause further complications. And again, when I say liver first, it's not exactly liver first. It's always chemo first followed by the liver first. The liver first is a way of saying that when it comes to surgery, we are operating on the liver before the colorectum, but then we always give chemo before doing this liver first surgery. And simultaneous, again, as I said, if you can do an uncomplicated liver resection, and that's a minor resection, that's like 2 segments, or primary surgery is also uncomplicated, and the patient is very fit. In these kind of cases, a simultaneous approach can be done. And what is the sequence of operating in these cases? Again, it's the standard principles: clean part followed by dirty, and more complex followed by less complex. So it's liver followed by primary. And again, in these cases, again, if the primary is asymptomatic, it would be preferable to give a short duration of chemotherapy prior to doing the simultaneous approach. So there's some confusion with rectal primaries as well. Especially for the postgraduates, it will always be like what to do first, because there's this extra factor of having to give radiotherapy. When I say rectal primary, again, it's for mid and lower rectal tumors. So when we have to give neoadjuvant radiotherapy protocols, so if it is resectable mets with the rectal primary and resectable liver mets, we give neoadjuvant chemoradiotherapy or radiotherapy regimen for the rectum first, and then plan the 2-stage surgery under the cover of perioperative chemotherapy. 2-stage again is usually liver followed by rectum, because rectum anyways you will be having that waiting period of 6 weeks or 3 months to look for the response. At the waiting period, that's when you can do and get away with the liver surgery. And in unresectable liver mets with a rectal primary, this is where again things get complicated. We need to give optimal chemo for the liver, because unresectable usually is because of higher tumor load. We don't want it to metastasize. So we start with the chemo for the liver and then add radiotherapy for the rectum and do liver surgery in that radiotherapy waiting period. After liver surgery, do the rectal surgery. And depending on how much of chemotherapy has been given preoperatively, you might have to complete the course of chemotherapy postoperatively as needed. So what is the evidence in favor of these approaches, liver first or primary first, etc.? There is a lot of evidence, but I'm not going to discuss on it because the scenarios are not strictly comparable. As my professor used to say, it's like comparing apples versus oranges. So it's we are not doing the same kind of resections. So I'm not going to discuss on the evidence. So it's all the scenarios themselves are not comparable. So but then there is evidence in favor of following this kind of approach. When it comes to metachronous colorectal mets, it's pretty straightforward. If it is resectable, give a short course of preoperative chemotherapy and then do surgery. If it is unresectable, again, give conversion chemotherapy and do surgery. I can't, impress any more on the importance of critical care and postoperative care and follow-up in these kind of complex surgeries and situations. Post-hepatectomy liver failure is very common, especially with chemotherapy being given in the preoperative period. So we need to have adequate setup, expertise, and knowledge of managing these post-hepatectomy liver failures. Managing sepsis, which almost always accompanies post-hepatectomy liver failures, bile leaks, which are common after complex liver resections. And when it comes to follow-up, obviously we need to manage, we need to do surveillance imaging on these cases and do frequency EAs and keep them under prolonged duration of follow-ups to identify the further lesion early and operate on them in time. There are some controversies in regard to this, the management of colorectal mets. So in the scenario where the primary is asymptomatic and resectable, but then the liver metastases are unresectable, and this is in synchronous setting, and we've given chemotherapy, conversion chemotherapy, despite that the liver mets is progressing or stable and it's still unresectable. Do we resect the primary in this? Again, there's no definite evidence, but then some experts say that the primary should be resected because it might become symptomatic in the future. Again, this is a controversy. And how to tackle stable or progressive liver disease after optimal chemo. So like in the case which I discussed in the start, it was progressive liver disease. We had given optimal chemo, but then it was resectable. Though that we know that the survival benefit in these kind of cases may not be great. Again, this is where we need to discuss with the patient and then make the appropriate plan as to whether to operate on these or to give some form of palliation. Coming to the topic of disappearing liver mets, it's a real problem. So the thing is, complete radiological response will not equate to complete pathological response. It does not equate to complete pathological response. Its pathological response is only seen in around 20% of the cases. So we need to operate on those. That is the line of thinking. That is the classical line of thinking. But then again, once it has disappeared, if we need to operate on that segment, and if that segment entails a major liver resection, anatomical liver resection, again, it's going against principles of parenchymal sparing liver surgery. Okay. I think someone has not muted the mic. Okay, continue. And we need to avoid chemotherapy in a few situations. Like, for example, if the initial meds are less than 2 centimeters, we need to, so the whole thing is disappearing liver mets can happen. We need to avoid that situation. How do we avoid that situation? Is we need to image early, image at 2 months after starting preoperative chemotherapy. Look for resectability and resect them early. And also use chemo with caution. If the metastases are less than 2 centimeters, we should be really cautious when using chemotherapy. Coming to another controversial topic in the field of colorectal liver mets, liver transplantation, whether it can be done for unresectable colorectal liver mets. So for those of the audience who are well versed with the concept of transplantation, we know that transplantation, the basic tenets of transplantation is that there should be adequate benefit from receiving the transplant. There should be utility of the organs, and when there are so many people on the waiting list waiting for an organ, the distribution of the organs should also be equitable. And when it comes to living donor liver transplant, it's based on double equipoise as to how much risk we are putting for the donor to get that a particular amount of benefit for the recipient. So with all this in mind, in the background, colorectal liver mets, we know that there is a very high chance of recurrence with immunosuppression. Again, it's not something like HCC where it's limited to the liver, and it's a different kind of pathology itself. It's a primary of the liver. So in those kind of cases, liver transplantation is definitely agreeable. But then in colorectal liver mets, it's again a big controversy. But then there are some countries where it's being done, like Norway, for example. They have even trials in this. They have done some small numbers. But then you need to look at the particular situation that they have. So they have more number of donors than the recipients for the liver. So in those kind of cases, they can always extend their indications for liver transplant, do it in other liver tumors like colorectal mets or intrahepatic cholangiocarcinomas, etc. And so this is based on one of the studies from Norway, where they've shown that the disease-free survival, the overall survival at 6 months is good, and the disease-free survival, it drops down, but then it's still around 40%. The overall survival around 80%, which is a very good number. And when we are talking about treatments like this for colorectal liver mets, we need to be very clear about the kind of patients that we are selecting. There are multiple scores which are available. This particular study had used PONG score. There's also Oslo score, which they've described based on the pre-transplant diameter of the tumor, CEA, and interval to transplant or progression under chemo. So all these are used in selection, even in these countries where they have an excess surplus of organs. They still are very selective in choosing the cases for liver transplant in such scenarios. Coming to palliation, yes, there are multiple modalities available, whether it's radiotherapy or single agent chemotherapy, etc., or TACE, etc. But then what is commonly used and what is less toxic is what I've written here. Single agent chemo is usually preferred. It's less toxic and it's simpler, and it serves the purpose. And there's this Debiri, which is TACE. It's basically TACE with drug-eluting beads of irinotecan. This is also very common and emerging modality of palliating these unresectable liver tumors. So I found this recent article where this is from Pong. Pong is the senior author in this again. So it discusses on when in the situation of colorectal metastasis, whether to liver or to multiple organs, when does one palliate, when does one prolong survival, or when can one cure? But again, sometimes it's just a continuum. Sometimes we operate for prolonging the survival along with giving chemotherapy and offering surgery, ablation, etc. And miraculously, you find that the patient is having long-term survival, and which you call as cure. Again, how do you define cure? Is it 5 years, 10 years? It's again, it's a lot of gray area. And again, sometimes you offer a treatment with the intention of cure, but then the tumor progresses and you won't be able to do that. So this eventually shows that tumor biology is the king. You might do quite a lot of things, whichever is under your control, but sometimes it's just the tumor which is manifesting its own mind, and you'll just have to accept it and do the best, whatever you can. So in the Indian scenario, again, so most of the studies, most of the literature which I've discussed and which is available is from the West. In the Indian scenario, somehow we know that the tumor biology and as well as the screening protocols are not there, so we see more advanced tumors. The tumor biology also, most of the senior GI faculty feel that we don't see as many colorectal liver mets, uh, liver mets only without other organ involvement in India. We see a lot more peritoneal disease. So maybe there's a change in genetics, there's a change in tumor biology. We don't have too much of data on that. We know that we see a lot more advanced tumors because of lack of screening. Resource availability is a problem. It's not very uniform. The centers which handle most of the caseload, the common centers or the charitable centers, may not have all the gamut of the advances in the form of infrastructure or expertise to tackle these kind of cases. Private healthcare, again, most of our cases, the Indian scenario, the Indian health system is mostly supported by the private healthcare. We know there are different complications which in the private healthcare system when such a patient goes. For example, I can say that it might so happen that a patient who is going with colonic primary and liver metastasis to a surgeon, a general surgeon, GI surgeon, whoever in the private sector, who is not someone who can tackle the liver mets, or the setup is not favorable for tackling the liver mets, but then he or she might still, go ahead and resect the colonic primary and say that, okay, we'll do the colonic primary, we'll tackle the colonic primary first, and then we'll refer for further care, further chemo or whatever to the next higher setup. These are complications which are a part of our system, but then we should always keep the patient's interest in mind and try and avoid such situations and refer early when required. And again, financial well-being is very important. We know a lot of our patients, who sell a lot of their properties to get cancer treatment. It's not very uncommon, whether it's in the government or charitable or private sectors. So sometimes we should not push very hard. Whatever I've described is all, it's all ideal, yeah, but then we should see what is best for our patient, and we should not push very hard. We should say what is okay for that patient and the family as well. So let me conclude with this, saying that surgery with chemo is the standard of care, and we are currently pushing the boundaries of resectability. There's a lot of advances in liver surgery, and parenchymal sparing liver surgery is the current norm. This is, whatever said and done about anatomical liver resections being better, parenchymal liver surgery is the current norm, and that should be followed whenever suitable or feasible, or again, as I said, common sense prevails. You should be able to select the right patient. And we need to understand the principles of treatment planning. And this, as I said in my slides on synchronous liver mets, if we can understand the principles of treatment planning, that will solve the confusion on sequencing of the therapies, which one should come first, whether it's surgery, chemo, or primary, or liver, etc. And again, the last message would be any surgeon or center should know its own limitations, and when required should refer early, and MDM discussions are very important in handling such any onco cases, but then especially in such complex onco scenarios. Saying this, I would like to thank Mr. Krish Menon, who is our consultant liver surgeon and my mentor. He's the videos which I've shown has been kindly provided by him. And Dr. Rosa, who's our consultant pathologist, she's shared her histopathology and gross images with me. So I would like to thank both of them for helping me out with this presentation. I will play this another video of liver laparoscopic liver resection for the caudate tumor. And so this is a slightly longer video. Maybe I just have to say a couple of more things, and we can take the questions as this video is playing. So this is mobilization of the liver. So again, one more thing which I wanted to say is, so when I'm saying when I'm talking about managing these colorectal liver mets and doing multiple surgeries, multiple procedures, it's not a one-time thing. The patient will be in and out of the hospital so frequently, and it takes a lot of acceptance from the patient side also, that the quality of life will be accepted, will be gone, and they are still wanting to get that small survival benefit, whatever they can. And it's the same thing. It's very analogous to liver transplant. Also, what I can say, like, it's definitely, liver transplant obviously gives a huge survival benefit. It literally cures the patient's original illness, etc. But then we see that the lifestyle after going for any such treatment changes drastically. It's not similar to what it was before. It's the way they live, their life choices, they also their acceptance of long-term outcomes, and being in and out of the hospital. All these is a huge factor. So these things need to be kept in mind. It's rather than it is if you talk about the tumor cure, yeah, it is cure for the tumor, but then sometimes it's more like a disability to get these kind of treatments, to be in and out, and to have these kind of therapies. Okay, so as the video is playing, I can probably take any questions or comments. I'll just fast forward the video. So this was the liver metastasis in the caudate, and it was closely abutting the IVC. So after a bit of caudate mobilization, we could see that the tumor is closely abutting the IVC, and this was confirmed on. This was known prior also, and this was confirmed on intraoperative ultrasound. Here we can see, just a second. So we can see the tumor there, and this is the IVC. So in this case, we used IRE. These are the IRE probes for margin accentuation. So we can see the probe sitting bang on the IVC there. And IRE pulses were given. And after margin accentuation like this, the caudate lobectomy was completed. Okay, I'll let this play. I'm happy to take any questions or any comments. Over to Dr. Radhakrishna.
The Shruti, I should admit, is one of the best lectures I have heard in Learning General Surgery. It's so thorough, so complete, and so balanced, and I think so extensive. We spoke more than 1.5 hours non-stop, and that's very, very highly appreciable, and you kept the audience glued to their screens. Ashwin, you would like to comment?
Sir, I just have two small comments. Shruti, hi, I'm Dr. Ashwin here from Chennai. It was an excellent talk, very, very comprehensive. It's like what Sir said, you covered every bit of what was there to cover. Two extremely small comments. One, I agree with your one-stage approach where you deal with the liver first and then go on to the onto the large bowel. But the other reason which for that approach is that sometimes when you do liver resection, you have to clamp the portal vein, and it can sometimes compromise the large bowel anastomosis, which you would have done previously if you had done the colonic surgery first. So that's one. And the other thing is that, again, what you stressed on was that it's always chemo, and then followed by surgery, and it's only transplantation when we cannot do liver resection. And we do have a topic on that in our liver transplantation series in the future. And thank you once again. I enjoyed your talk.
Thank you.
Any other comments, questions from the audience, please? So once again, Shruti, is a lovely talk. We would like to have more talks from you as long as you're in India.
Yes, sir, it's okay. I'll give talks even if I'm in UK. It shouldn't be a problem.
Okay.
Things out.
No, because it's a little easier, and I hope you have some. You're on a holiday. Yeah.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah. Thank you, sir. Thank you for the opportunity. I mean, if there's any more questions or comments, I believe.
Let the video be over.
Yeah.
Bhatta sir. Bhatta sir.
Yes.
I'm Dr. Rajendra.
Yeah, Rajendra. Yeah.
Ask
Please.
a question
Sure.
from the madam.
Shruti, Rajendran is a professor of surgical gastroenterology in Chennai.
Yes, handled for a colorectal
Okay.
metastasis.
Hello, sir.
Yeah, Rajendran.
Yes. How many cases of colorectal liver metastasis you handle as a liver first approach?
Sir, all that I can say is, in synchronous liver metastasis, as I said, given the right situations, that the primary is asymptomatic, the unit protocol is to do liver first whenever possible. Again, it's not about a particular percentage or something. All of these are discussed in the colorectal MDM, which happens every week. Each case is discussed in detail. And also I need to say, when I say the colon primary is done, as I said, when it's symptomatic. Again, in symptomatic, it's most commonly obstruction, and in obstruction again, though I said that surgery for primary is preferable with obstruction, the usual practice there is we use a lot more colonic stents than in India.
Yes.
So it's almost always liver first in those kind of cases.
Yes, madam. Then regarding rectal metastasis.
So rectal metastasis obviously will be giving neoadjuvant chemoradiotherapy first. So it gets slightly complicated there. If there's good response, and when we are waiting for the response anyways for 6 weeks, 3 months, whatever is the protocol. Again, if there's not many complications for chemotherapy, the patient is fit enough, we go ahead and do the liver first again.
Fantastic, madam. You are giving a short course radiotherapy in rectal malignancies?
Sir, it's usually, no, to my knowledge, again, I'm primarily in liver transplant. So to my knowledge, it's not short course radiotherapy, it's neoadjuvant chemoradiotherapy, which is given. I might be wrong on this. I'll have to check again with the unit, but I'm primarily in liver transplant. I don't know very much in detail on the unit protocol in these kind of cases. I've not come across any such cases receiving short course chemotherapy. I'll have to revisit, and I can.
Or short course radiotherapy only given?
Sir?
Short course radiotherapy is given, or full course? That is
to my knowledge, it's full course.
Okay, madam. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks, Rajendra. Nice seeing you here.
Thank you, sir. It's a very nice discussion.
Yeah.
Thank you. So
And another comment is you have done a lot of laparoscopic resections.
Yes, sir. So yeah, King's is my center is again The surgeon whom I mentioned, Mr. Krishnan, he is a laparoscopic liver surgeon. He does a lot of laparoscopic liver surgeries, both minor and major, and we get a lot of referrals for the same reason. And all these cases are discussed in MDTs, and we do almost 1 or 2 laparoscopic liver surgery almost every week in our unit in King's. So yeah, because of the high volume that we get and the expertise that we have, we kind of evolve over time, and it becomes much more easier to tackle complex cases as well.
Nice, madam. Nice, madam. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
So on that note, again, Shruti, thank you so much. Thanks for the effort and thanks for sharing your knowledge here. And again, I welcome you to this platform more often. Thank you so much. Thanks.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks
Thank you
everyone
for
for watching.